Before we begin, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for being part of the story.
This incident occurred about 10 years ago at our family-run used car dealership in a small northern province. At the time, my younger brother and I had just graduated from school. Rather than seeking traditional jobs, we were given the opportunity to take over our family business of buying and selling used cars from our father, who had been running it for many years. The events began one quiet morning while I was working at the dealership. Suddenly, a man drove in and approached me. He expressed his intention to sell his car and offered a price far below the market value. I was immediately interested because the car was a recent model, released only the previous year. I realized that purchasing it could be a lucrative opportunity, as it would likely sell quickly for a good profit. Excited by the prospect, I immediately called our mechanic, who had worked with my father for a long time. The mechanic inspected the car and confirmed that it was in excellent condition and a good deal. With that assurance, I finalized the purchase and brought the car into the dealership. Once we had the car, we gave it a thorough wash, polished it, and placed it prominently on display to attract potential buyers. Just as I had expected, the car attracted attention almost immediately. By late afternoon, a customer came by to take a look. One glance was all it took. He fell in love with the car and decided to buy it. After placing a deposit, the customer and I began the process of arranging financing through the bank. The day ended successfully, with a promising sale in progress. However, this was only the beginning of a series of strange occurrences. The dealership had a unique layout, with separate sections for the car lot and our small living quarters, just slightly larger than a container box, which we called our house. The area in front of the road was reserved for cars waiting to be sold, while cars that had already been sold were moved to a designated area near our house. Following this routine, we parked the newly sold car just outside, next to our home, while waiting for the bank to finalize the loan. The first night passed uneventfully, but the next morning, around 8 a.m., the mechanic arrived at the dealership as usual to clean and prepare the other cars on the lot. After finishing my personal morning routine, I came out to start work at 9 a.m., only for the mechanic to approach me with a strange story. He explained that he'd had a bizarre dream the previous night.
I had a weird dream last night. In my dream, there was a skinny man sitting in that car I inspected yesterday. He was crying his heart out.
He described the man as distraught, sobbing uncontrollably inside the very car we had sold the day before. I chuckled, brushing off the story. Maybe you had one too many drinks last night and dreamed up some nonsense, I teased, knowing his reputation for heavy drinking. I thought little of it and went about my day. The next day, the mechanic arrived early again and approached me with yet another strange story. This time, he dreamt that while washing the car, a skinny man appeared in the truck bed. The man was crying, stomping his feet, and acting like a child. Then, he sat down in the truck bed and began shaking his legs, shouting repeatedly,
"Give me my car back! Give it back to me!"
In the dream, the mechanic yelled back at him.
The car's already been sold, buddy.
I laughed again, shaking my head. You've really got some imagination. Are you sure you're not still drunk from the night before? Despite his serious demeanor, I dismissed the story as another figment of his overactive mind and carried on with work. Things took an even stranger turn on the third day. This time, it wasn't just the mechanic who showed up early, but one of the sales staff too. He arrived unusually early at 8 a.m. instead of his usual 9 a.m. Curious, I asked him why he came to work so early. The sales staff shared that he too had dreamt about the car. In his dream, the same skinny man the mechanic had seen was sitting in the car, crying and banging his head against the dashboard repeatedly. I turned to the mechanic and said with a laugh, "See what you've started? You've been talking about this so much that now even the whole dealership is dreaming about this man." Still, with a serious face, the mechanic insisted that he'd had the exact same dream again, where he saw the man throwing a tantrum in the truck bed just like before, shouting for the car to be returned. By now, their insistence was starting to annoy me. I dismissed their claims as shared delusions, or perhaps the result of too much talking about it. Shaking my head, I went back to focusing on my work and continued my day as usual. Later that evening, the bank called to inform me that the customer's loan application had been approved and that the customer could come to pick up the car. However, since it was late, I decided to call the customer the following morning. That night, my brother was staying at our parents' house, which was just across the street. I found myself alone at home with only our dog for company. This set the stage for what would turn out to be the most unsettling experience of all. After finishing some personal errands, I returned home around 9 p.m. As I walked back into the house, I happened to pass by a car parked in the lot. For some reason, I instinctively ran my hand over the hood and murmured, "You'll have a new owner tomorrow." After saying that, I went into the house, completed my evening routines, and eventually settled down to watch TV. While I was sitting there relaxing, my dog suddenly began to act very strangely. She started scratching at the door as though she desperately wanted to go outside. I figured that maybe she needed to relieve herself, so I got up and walked over to open the door for her. When I opened the door, I found myself facing the rows of cars parked outside. The lighting in the lot was dim because only a few lights had been left on. Although I was familiar with the view, having lived there for a long time, something about that night's atmosphere felt eerily unsettling. As soon as the door was opened, the dog ran straight to the same car that had been sold to a customer and was waiting to be picked up the next day, and began howling. This was bizarre, because the dog had never howled before. I called her name again and again, trying to get her to come back inside. But no matter how many times I called, she didn't respond. She just stayed in the same spot, howling continuously as she fixated on the car. At first, I thought there might be a thief inside, but from where I stood, the car seemed empty. Growing uneasy, I stepped out of the house and began walking toward the dog. However, before I could get close, she suddenly started running in circles around the car as if chasing something invisible. The sight made me stop from getting any closer because her behavior was so odd, and I felt scared to approach. She kept barking and howling near the driver's side door, her attention fixed on it. Whatever she saw, I couldn't see it, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. I stood there calling out to the dog for quite a while, but as the moments passed, the atmosphere grew even more eerie. It made my skin crawl, and I began to feel genuinely frightened. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The car started shaking, as though someone inside was rocking it back and forth. Horrified, I quickly turned back toward the house, grabbed my phone, and texted my younger brother to ask if he was at home. He replied that he was. I then sent another message, asking him to unlock the door because I was on my way over. Without looking back, I called out to the dog, hastily left the house, and headed straight to my parents' place. The dog finally followed me as I approached the house. When I arrived, I recounted everything to my brother. He listened, but being the skeptic he always was, he just shook his head and laughed it off. The next morning, I went to work as usual. When I arrived at the lot, one of the staff approached me and said,
"Excuse me, someone's waiting for you."
I turned to see a car parked nearby. A monk stepped out, and at first, I thought he had come to look at the cars. However, my attention was drawn when the driver's side door opened, and I saw the man who had sold me the car the other day step out. I was confused, unsure of what was going on. Then, a woman also got out of the car, holding a frame picture of a man. When the sales staff saw the photo, he froze. He rushed over to me and exclaimed,
It's him! The man I saw in my dream!"
I was stunned. still trying to make sense of everything. When I finally looked closely at the photo, I realized it was a funeral portrait of a deceased man. The woman holding the photo started to cry and begged.
Please, can I buy the car back? Ever since I sold it, I haven't been able to eat or sleep.
Still bewildered, I asked, "Why? Is there something wrong with the car?" The man who sold me the car admitted,
I didn't mention this before, but this car used to belong to my younger brother.
he had a fight with his girlfriend and ended up shooting himself in the driver's seat. Everyone around us was shocked, and I was left speechless. The woman continued to sob, pleading for me to sell the car back to her. Even the monk joined in, asking me to consider returning the car. At that moment, I was completely overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. I had already sold the car to a new customer, so it wasn't something I could easily undo. However, after hearing their desperate pleas, I decided to contact the finance company and explain the situation. The staff there said they could arrange for a similar car of comparable value to be given to the new customer, as long as I discussed it with the customer first. I called the new customer, explained everything, and fortunately, he was understanding and agreed to the exchange for a different car. In the end, I returned the car to its original owner. But this experience left a lasting impression on everyone involved and became a haunting story that we would never forget.